All right, so let's dive right into this whole school choice thing that's been all over the news lately.
Yeah,
You've probably heard about President Trump's possible executive order.
right.
We've got the CBS News article here that breaks it all down.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear that this could seriously shake things up,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to your kid's education.
Yeah.
And actually, here's a pretty crazy fact to kick things off.
Okay.
Did you know that only a tiny percentage of public school funding actually comes from the feds? Like, it's only 14%?
Wow. Yeah, that is a surprisingly small amount.
So that really makes you think how much power this executive order really has.
That's a really good point. It's easy to assume the federal government's got total control over the money,
Right.
but when you're talking about education, that's just not how it works. So, yeah, even with all this talk about school choice, the real impact might not be as huge as people think.
Okay, so let's take a closer look at what this executive order actually says. There are a few key things it focuses on. First, it really wants to push school choice programs,
Okay.
which basically means directing those federal dollars away from traditional public schools and towards other options.
Uh-huh.
Then there's this specific part about the Department of Defense.
Right.
They're being told to come up with a plan for military families to use their education money for school choice.
Okay, interesting.
And on top of that, there's this whole push for the Department of Education and Health and Human Services to figure out how they can use their block grants to support private and even faith-based schools.
And we're not even just talking about moving existing funds around.
Right.
The order actually goes a step further and tells the Department of Education that when they're giving out grants, they should prioritize school choice programs.
Oh, wow.
So
Look at go.
basically, future funding could end up going more towards things like vouchers and scholarships for private schools. It's a pretty clear sign that the administration is serious about supporting alternatives to those traditional public schools.
So yeah, we're talking about potential changes that could affect the whole education system. But before we go any further, let's take a step back for a second.
Okay.
What exactly are we talking about when we say school choice?
Right.
We hear it all the time, but it can be a little vague.
Yeah. So basically, school choice is all about giving parents more options for their kids' education, beyond just going to their assigned public school.
Okay.
Think things like vouchers to help families afford private school, or tax credits for educational expenses,
Right.
or even charter schools, which operate independently but still get public funding.
So instead of automatically going to the school down the street, families could have the resources to check out different schools that might be a better fit.
Exactly. And that's where things get kind of heated.
Okay.
Supporters of school choice, they argue that it creates competition, which pushes all schools to get better to attract students.
Makes sense.
They also say it's super important to give parents the power to choose schools that match their values and what their kids need.
I bet there are people who aren't too happy about this whole idea, though.
Oh, for sure. Critics worry that taking money away from public schools could actually hurt the very kids that school choice is supposed to help.
Oh, how so?
Well, they say that public schools, many of which are already underfunded, could lose even more resources.
Yeah.
And that could put students from low-income families at a bigger disadvantage because they might not be able to afford those other options.
So it's definitely a complicated issue with good points on both sides.
It really is.
And it's important to remember that President Trump has always been a big supporter of school choice. So this executive order definitely fits with what he wants to see happen with education.
Absolutely. This isn't anything new for him, but to understand what this executive order could actually mean,
Right.
we have to go back to that interesting fact about federal funding that you mentioned earlier.
That 14%.
Yeah, only 14% coming from the federal government.
Right.
So, can this executive order really change the entire landscape of education in America?
Yeah, especially when you consider that most of the funding comes from states and local communities.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how much influence the administration actually has.
And on top of all that, there's the recent directive from the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB.
Yeah.
They've put a temporary hold on federal assistance.
Oh, wow.
Now it's supposed to be short term, but it definitely adds some uncertainty to how this executive order will actually be implemented.
Right, especially when it comes to the money for those educational grant programs.
Exactly.
And to make things even more complicated, a federal judge has actually issued a stay on the order,
Yeah.
putting a pause on it, going into effect right away.
Wow, that is definitely adding another layer to all of this.
It really does. This legal challenge just shows how many different people are involved.
Right.
Parents, teachers, policymakers, advocacy groups.
All of them.
They're all going to have their say on whether this executive order is even legal and what it will actually mean for everyone.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is.
Yeah.
So it seems like this executive order's future is pretty uncertain.
Yeah,
It's a lot to take in,
it is.
especially considering what's already going on in education right now.
Right.
We can't forget about the recent data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP.
Yeah, the NADP.
It's been causing quite a stir,
It has,
especially when you look at reading proficiency.
for sure.
This data looks at 4th and 8th graders all across the country,
Right.
and it's painting a pretty concerning picture.
Uh-huh.
Early reports are saying that 40% of 4th graders aren't even meeting the basic reading levels.
Oh, wow.
That's the highest it's ever been.
That's really not good.
And both 4th and 8th grade reading scores have kept dropping since 2022.
Oh, man.
They've each gone down by 2 points.
That is, that's definitely something to be worried about.
It is, especially since reading is so important for learning everything else.
Right, it's the foundation.
And it's not just reading. The NAEP data shows that a lot of 8th graders are struggling with math too.
Yeah. This data is important because it gives us some context for this whole school choice debate.
Yeah.
It doesn't give us the answers, but it shows us the challenges that American education is facing.
Right.
And it's making people talk about what needs to change and how to help students who are falling behind.
It makes you think about the timing of this executive order, right?
Right.
Releasing it just after this worrisome NALPP data comes out
Mm-hmm.
could definitely influence how the public sees it.
Right.
It could make more people support school choice.
Yeah, it's almost like saying, hey, look, what we're doing now isn't working, so let's try something new.
Exactly. And it's worth pointing out that the White House document itself actually talks a lot about the need for fairness in education.
Oh.
It says every child deserves the best education possible, no matter where they live.
That sounds great.
It does, but I'm curious about what that really means. How does that idea of fairness actually work with school choice?
That's a great question. Supporters of school choice say that it actually makes things more fair. They say it gives families in disadvantaged areas the same chances as those in wealthier neighborhoods.
Okay.
They think that by having more choices, parents can choose schools that truly fit their kids' needs, regardless of how much money they have. But critics, they worry that school choice could actually make existing inequalities even worse.
So how could something meant to create more opportunities potentially end up making things less fair?
Well, imagine what would happen if families with more resources are the only ones who can actually use these school choice options.
Right.
They'd be leaving behind the students stuck in under-resourced public schools.
Yeah.
Critics say that this could create a two-tiered education system,
Oh, wow.
which would further disadvantage students who are already facing a lot of obstacles.
It's a really delicate balance.
It is.
And it seems like this executive order is just making an already intense debate even more heated.
Definitely. But this executive order isn't the only thing we need to be watching. President Trump has also nominated Linda McMahon to be the new Secretary of Education.
Oh, right.
Her confirmation is still up in the air, but if she gets the job, she could have a huge influence on education policy.
McMahon's background is pretty interesting, right?
Very. She used to be a wrestling executive, and then she ran the Small Business Administration.
Right.
So she's bringing a totally different perspective to the Department of Education.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say for sure how her leadership will affect these school choice initiatives.
It will be interesting to see how she handles all the complexities of the education system
Absolutely.
and what role she plays in shaping the future of school choice. And speaking of shaping the future, there's another way school choice could be expanded.
How so?
Tax breaks to help families afford private school tuition.
That's a good point, and it shows us that there could be changes beyond just this executive order.
Right.
But to make those tax breaks happen, Congress would need to approve them,
True.
which just adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing. It's not going to happen overnight.
So to sum it all up, we've got this executive order pushing for school choice. We've got this heated debate surrounding it.
Uh-huh.
And we've got the potential for even more policy changes down the road.
It's a lot to keep track of.
It really is.
Yeah.
It raises some important questions for you, our listener.
Absolutely. We've looked at the details of the executive order, the different forms of school choice, and pros and cons.
Yeah.
But the most important question is, what does all of this mean for your child's education?
That's what we'll be looking at in the next part of our deep dive. So we've talked a lot about the executive order and the whole school choice debate, but let's bring it back to you, the listener. What does this mean for your community?
Right.
And more importantly, for your child's education?
It's important to remember that this isn't just some theoretical discussion happening far away in Washington.
Right.
This executive order could really directly impact schools and families all across the country.
We talked about the possibility of more funding for school choice programs.
Yeah.
But what would that actually look like?
Well, imagine a family living in a rural area. Yeah. Maybe their public school system is struggling.
Right.
This executive order could mean they could get vouchers to send their child to a private school in a nearby town, or even try out some online learning options.
Okay, that makes sense.
Or picture a military family that moves around a lot.
Yeah, those families have it tough.
This directive for the Department of Defense could give them way more flexibility in choosing schools.
Right. So their kids can have more stability.
Exactly, more continuity in their education.
It sounds like school choice could open up a whole new world of possibilities for families who haven't had these options before.
It really could.
But we got to think about the potential downsides, too.
Oh, absolutely.
One of the biggest worries is the impact this could have on public schools.
How so?
Well, if a lot of students are choosing different options, public schools could lose enrollment,
Yeah.
which usually means less money.
Right.
And that could make the differences between schools in wealthier areas and those in poorer communities even bigger. So some schools might thrive with the competition and having more control over their funding,
Right.
but others might struggle to keep up, and the achievement gap could get wider.
That's exactly it. It's not a simple issue.
Yeah.
There are no easy answers. We have to talk about this carefully and realize that the effects of school choice will be different in every community.
So with all this to consider, how can parents and community members make sense of it all
Right.
and figure out what's best for their kids?
The most important thing is to stay informed about what specific school choice proposals are being discussed in your local area.
Okay, so really pay attention to what's happening locally.
Yeah. Go to school board meetings, talk to teachers and policymakers, and really advocate for policies that put the needs of all students first.
So this isn't just a debate for politicians and experts.
Not at all.
It's a conversation that every community in the country should be having.
I agree. Parents, teachers, and everyone in the community need to come together. Talk about the potential good and bad that could come from school choice.
Yeah.
Think things through carefully and consider what their community really needs.
It's clear that this executive order has started a national conversation.
It really has.
But we can't forget that the future of education isn't decided by just one policy.
Absolutely. It's a process that never ends. And
Uh,
everyone needs to be involved. We need to have open and honest conversations about our values, our priorities,
Yeah.
and what kind of education system we want for future generations.
It's easy to get caught up in all the political back and forth.
It is.
But at the end of the day, this is about our kids.
That's what it always comes back to.
And it's up to all of us to make sure they have access to a quality education,
Right.
one that gives them the knowledge, the skills, and the critical thinking abilities they need to succeed in a world that's changing so fast.
I couldn't have said it better myself. This deep dive has definitely given us a lot to think about.
It has.
We've looked at all the complexities of this school choice debate, the possible impact of this executive order,
Right.
and how important it is for communities to be involved in shaping education policy.
Absolutely. But we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah, this conversation is far from over.
It really isn't.
And it's so important that we keep exploring these issues,
Right.
challenging what we think we know,
Yeah.
and talking to each other in a way that helps us move forward.
And while we're talking about challenging assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
let's go back to that NAAEP data we talked about earlier.
Right, with those concerning reading scores.
Yeah. It's not a pretty picture of how American education is doing right now.
It isn't.
Reading scores are going down.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of students aren't even meeting basic proficiency levels.
This data really makes us ask some tough questions about how effective our current approaches to education are.
Yeah, like, are we really preparing students for what they'll need in the 21st century?
Exactly. Are we giving them the support they need to succeed?
It's like a wake-up call.
It-
It's telling us to take a good hard look at our education system
Yeah.
and think about what needs to change.
And a lot of people are pointing to school choice as a possible solution.
Right.
But we have to look at the evidence carefully
Mm-hmm.
and ask ourselves if it really gets to the root of the problem.
We can't just jump on the school chase bandwagon without thinking about what could happen,
Right.
both the good and the bad.
Exactly. It's about finding solutions that work for all students,
Right.
not just a select few.
And that means understanding all the complex things that contribute to inequality in education.
Absolutely. Things like poverty,
Right.
lack of access to good early childhood education,
Right.
and even the biases that are built into the system itself.
So it's about more than just giving people choices.
It is,
It's about creating a system that helps all students
right?
and gives them the power to reach their full potential, no matter their background or where they live.
And that's something we should all be working towards. We can't be okay with a system that leaves some students behind.
Right. Every child deserves the chance to succeed.
Absolutely.
And it's our responsibility to make that happen.
I completely agree. Now, I know we've been talking big picture stuff.
Yeah, national debates and complex education policy.
Exactly. But let's bring it back down to a personal level.
Okay.
What does all of this mean for you, the listener, and your own kids?
Yeah, what questions are you thinking about as you hear all of this?
That's what we'll be talking about in the last part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we'll be getting into the personal side of school choice,
Right.
what questions you should be asking,
Uh-huh.
and what you can do to make sure your kids get the best education possible.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about how this executive order could affect things nationally and in your community.
Right.
We've looked at the data that shows how American education is doing.
Uh-huh.
But now let's really get personal. What does this mean for you and your family?
This isn't just some theoretical discussion. It's about real choices that could affect your kid's future.
Right.
So let's talk about some questions you might be asking yourself.
If one, you might be thinking, is school choice even the right thing for my child?
It's a fair question.
And there's no one answer that fits every kid.
Right.
You really have to think about your child's individual needs,
Okay.
their learning style, their personality.
Yeah, some kids do better in a structured environment, and
Agreed.
others need more flexibility.
And personalized attention. So really think about what kind of learning environment would help your child grow and develop the most.
And it's not just about the child either.
Right.
Parents need to think about their own values and priorities too.
Absolutely. What
So-
kind of educational philosophy do you believe in?
Right, like traditional or more progressive.
Exactly. Is religious instruction important to you, or do you prefer a secular curriculum?
These are all really important things to think about when you're looking at school choice options.
They really are. And it's also crucial to do your research on the specific schools you're considering.
Okay.
Don't just go by their reputation or test scores.
Right. Dig a little deeper. Talk to other parents who have kids there.
Yeah.
Visit the schools, see what the atmosphere is like,
Right.
and really look at their curriculum. Think about the school's culture and values.
Okay.
Do they match up with yours? Does the environment feel welcoming and supportive?
And don't forget, school choice isn't just about private schools.
Right.
Charter schools are another option besides traditional public schools.
Yeah, and they can be really different from each other in terms of what they focus on.
Yeah,
Some charter schools are all about STEM.
Okay.
Others might emphasize the arts or hands-on learning.
So you really need to understand what each charter school is about before you make a decision.
For sure. Now, you might also be wondering about the practical side of school choice.
Right, like how do vouchers work?
Exactly. What are the tax implications?
Yeah.
How do you enroll your child in a charter school?
It can be confusing.
These are all important questions that you need to look into carefully. Talk to your local school district. Look for information online and connect with other parents who have gone through this process.
It can be really helpful to talk to other parents who have been there.
And don't be shy about asking for help. There are organizations and groups out there that can help families navigate these school choice options.
Yeah, you don't have to figure this out all on your own.
Exactly. So remember, this executive order has started a big discussion about education,
It has.
but the real impact is going to be felt in your community, in your schools.
So what can you do to make your voice heard?
Start by staying informed. Go to school board meetings, attend community events, and talk to teachers and policymakers.
Right, make your voice heard.
Don't underestimate how powerful your voice can be. As parents and community members, you have a huge role to play in advocating for the kind of education system you want.
So write letters to your elected officials, share your thoughts online, and team up with other parents who have the same concerns.
Remember, education isn't something you just watch from the sidelines.
Yeah.
It takes all of us working together.
So ask tough questions, push for change, and help create a better future for all kids.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive.
We have.
We've looked at how this executive order works, talked
Yeah.
about the good and bad of school choice, and seen some data that's making people think hard about education.
Right.
But more than anything, we hope this has helped you feel more confident in speaking up for your children's education.
Every child deserves a chance to succeed.
And it's up to all of us to build an education system that helps them do just that.
So stay curious, stay involved, and stay informed. The future of education is in our hands.